I made a patch on my Nord that sounds vaguely reminiscent of birds. So I've never actually been in a forest with quite this much reverb, so that might be a giveaway that it is not in fact the sound of birds, but it is the sound of a friggin' synth. Well, actually, I guess it's a mellotron sample, so it is a sample, but it ain't birds. It's just a sound. It's just a single drone. And all that's happening here is we're playing with the resonance of a filter, the LPM filter, which I believe is modeled after the famous Moog filters, which have a really powerful kind of self-oscillation when you crank the resonance. So we're gonna talk about how to build this sound. I'll address the piano sound a little bit, that kind of like octave down delay that slowly fades as you get into lower territory, so it doesn't get too muddy. So anyways, we'll break all that down, and I'm hoping to just make this one of many videos about how I build patches for various projects. So this all started because I was building a sound for an artist named Nella called Solita. And the song starts with this kind of like broken up, distant organ sound. It's very cool. And if you listen on Spotify, you'll recognize it, but you'll probably say, oh, it's not like a perfect emulation of the sound. It's a very challenging sound to emulate. But I think what I love about the Nord is with combining all these different layers and effects, you can get really close. And if I can do as much as I can on one board, that makes my life a lot easier. So basically, I was working on this sound, which is this kind of layer, and this layer, all combined. And I found that when I was messing around with the filter, if I cranked the resonance and brought the cutoff up high, you get kind of like these like tweeting sounds like a bird, right? So anyways, let's go back to our birds thing, and I just kind of want to walk you through how we get to this sound. And in fact, maybe the best way to do that is to go to a blank patch. Oh, I already started in a previous take. I used that one. So let's go to this one. We're going to turn it on. Now, I think a saw wave might be a little bit too abrasive, is my guess. It might lead to a lot of pops and clicks in the audio. So let's take a sample. I mean, or we could take a sine wave or a softer wave, whatever. But for fun, let's take a string sample like this. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our LFO to be a random wave, sample and hold. And we're going to apply it to the filter. So let's turn on our filter. And I'm going to go ahead and zero these out just so it's not confusing. So obviously we don't hear it because the filter is rolled off. And as we bring it up, we start to hear it. So we've already applied the LFO to the filter, and we're just going to turn up the amount here. So it's happening pretty slowly. So we'll bump the rate quite a bit. And now we're kind of hearing that general randomness that you associate with birds in a forest, chickadees and such. But obviously it sounds nothing like birds. So what's going to happen when we crank the resonance is that we're going to start to hear every frequency of the cutoff accentuated by the filter. All right, so that's with the resonance all the way up, all the way down, and slowly bringing it back up. So there's a lot of those poppy, clicky bits, right? So that's kind of the first issue I want to solve for. I'm going to slow this down a little bit. Yeah, that was like meth birds. This is more like weed birds. But regardless, these are all going to sound like birds on drugs because birds, as far as I know, don't really play synth. They're a little better and more beautiful than this, but we're doing our best with the technology at hand. So that's a pretty good starting point. You can kind of play with the frequency. Like if you bring it down too low, it's going to be like post-pubescent birds. Bring it up too high, and you've got these little teeny, barely audible birds. So you want to kind of find that sweet spot, and then you can tweak the modulation amount, right? This kind of keeps them all in one register. This kind of breaks them up to be like the highs and the lows. So that's not a bad starting point. And honestly, I'm surprised how little of the low-end information we're getting now. I'm going to go ahead and save this and jump back to my birds patch. If we turn off the effects, you can hear that low drone. So who knows, maybe I'll actually make it better in this video than I did then. So I'll go ahead and put keyboard hold on, which means press it once and it's going to ring out The first thing that comes to mind is reverb. But we have this issue where, and I'm gonna make it full wet, it's still very like digital, right? You hear those like clicks and pops? That's not very bird-like. So my solution to that problem is to use, well, and this is interesting because we don't have much low-end information. So there's two ways we can approach this. We can use a low-pass filter. Sorry, I didn't turn that on. And you can kind of cut out some of that. Sounds a little less abrasive, right? But in my birds patch, I'm gonna go ahead and store that. I actually used a high pass filter here because without it, there was just a ton of low end information coming through. So I guess the way I set up this this synth section is actually working out to our advantage. So anyways, back to where we were. So we could use the low pass filter here and roll off some of those highs, or we can use the delay low pass here, go full wet, and immediately, right, it becomes a bit darker, a little easier on the ears. Set this to, you know, half a second more or less. And then we can play around with some of these different settings. I landed on space with the variation. So again, no effects, effects. And it's gonna take a little bit to set in because we have full wet on the delay, so we're not getting any dry signal. I used a little compression just to kind of boost the level, optional. And I used a high pass filter, which isn't really necessary, but if you really wanted to isolate just the tweetiest little birds, then you could bring that up and kind of color it as needed. Or if you wanted to say, just use it as an EQ, you could find a frequency you like, that nice mid-range bird, and boost that. Anyways, it's kind of nice without that, so we'll leave that as is. Definitely need some auto pan to give it that kind of wide sense of flying around in the forest. Slow rate, high amount. Now once that's sent through all the delay and everything, and you could even add ping pong delay to give it even more kind of bounciness. Once it's sent through the delay and the reverb, it doesn't really register that much as like an obvious auto pan. It's just kind of like a wash of sound. And I added some chorus. High amount, low rate. Not really sure that changes anything in the grand scheme. But there you go. That sounds like birds. So I'll go ahead and store that. And let's jump over to this one. It's kind of cool because they're very different qualities, right? But same approach. Probably should play a lower note maybe. To getting a bird sound. So let's jump back over to this patch. Talk through a couple things here. I have the birds just split at this point here. So I just press one note. I don't, doesn't really matter what note I press. So if I just have one note to press the birds, then I just take up a little tiny bit of keyboard real estate and I can do whatever else I want down here. Very nice, very nice. So let's turn that off for a bit and take a look at the piano. What's going on over here? We've got our primary layer. So a little bit of delay, a little bit of auto pan, a little bit of verb, but nothing crazy. Spring verb. And on this layer, we've got our echo, which is mostly a wet signal, right? Gets louder on the repeat because this is turned past 50%. But you get a little bit on the downbeat. And when you mix them together, it's nice for playing little quick stuff like that, right? You get this kind of like lower echo with additional effects. Now, you'll see this split point is red, and that's because it fades out in the lower octave. So over these 12 semitones, it's gonna slowly fade away. So let's solo it. Right? And by here, totally gone. So that just kind of prevents it from getting too muddy down here. If I were to turn that off, it's just, right? A lot of low growl. So that's a super useful thing to be able to fade it out so it doesn't sound like it just stops at one point in the keyboard. It just kind of slowly disappears. We like that. All right. So in terms of effects, like I said, first one, very simple. It's a bright felt piano. I'll show you that here, felt upright. And I love the bright setting because you just get a bit more of that attack. And I think I even have a little more brightness here. So I've got the treble probably cranked a bit. And a little auto pan, a little delay, nothing fancy, so I'm not gonna talk about that so much. And let's see what's going on in the echo. Well, we're definitely hearing this, right? Because without that, it just sounds a little too plain. So that's the ensemble feature, and we've got it at, oops, oh yeah, all the way up, and 1.3 rate. So slow rate, high amount, that's kind of a trend here. And a little auto pan sending it around. Again, kind of a long delay. And I believe both these delays are, oh, looks like this one's mapped. Oh yeah, there we go. It's mapped to the wheel. So that's a fun feature. Whoa. There we go. Interesting. Something changed. It definitely was not set to 10 after all. Let's check that out again. Ensemble. What is our amount here? It is set to 10. Huh. Sounded so different there. So anyways, you put those together. So what's this delay doing? It's modulating the tempo of the delay on the kind of background octave down sample. And because we're in analog mode, that's gonna adjust the pitch. So there you go. That's kind of a walkthrough of everything that's going on in my birds patch. I'll send you off with a little trip to the forest. Something like that. All right, so there you go. Hope to make a lot more of these, so thanks for tuning in.